Greetings, wonderful students. Brian Doak here, coming at you one final time in this video lecture series from my office here, back in the office where it all began at George Fox University. Christianity and the problem of evil has been our topic through these lectures. We have reached the final video, which I am calling Which Theodicy is Best? The professor weighs in and renders judgment. I've wanted to kind of lay back in some ways throughout these lectures in terms of being very heavy-handed with my own opinions. I've not wanted to do that. I haven't done that because I don't have opinions, or I don't think some theodicy approaches are better than others, or I don't have opinions about the readings. Surely you must suspect that I do. But rather I've wanted you to engage in the struggle, and I've wanted to present myself as a neutral voice to help you weigh options and think, which is our goal in a university environment that I'm leading us through here. And so I hope that's been helpful. I hope that you haven't felt left alone or unsupported as I've just bombarded you in dozens of these video lectures with all kinds of views and ways of thinking about suffering and evil. The topic of suffering and evil is one of the topics that will probably hit us the hardest and touch us the deepest in our lives in some ways, just in terms of our experience on earth. And no matter what, we're all going to deal with it at the very least, at least one time. We'll deal with it more than that, but we're going to deal with it on the day of our death. Our death might come upon us quickly. We might see it coming for just a moment, just enough to panic, to feel the fear, and to wonder what's next. It might be slow and agonizing beyond what we ever thought we could bear. But whatever it is, it's coming, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen for all of us. And, you know, I mean, one exercise we can do in the great Christian tradition of thinking about death and remembering our death and remembering our place on earth in place of death, as the book of Ecclesiastes admonishes us to do repeatedly, is to think, I mean, you can do this with a calculator. It's really weird. I've done this before several times. I've thought about this. Think about how old, ideally, just for fun, ideally, how old would you like to be when you die? 70, 80, 90, 100? I'll admit that at least right now in my life, I've wanted to live a very long life. Presuming that the quality of my life is high, I'd love to live into my 90s or 100s. None of my grandparents have really lived that long, or seem like they will, those who are still alive. So I don't know if the genes are not on my side, and who knows. But you can take that number, whatever that is, say it's like 90, and find the day of your birth, the year of your birth, and just add the number to the year of your birth. And you get a year in which you would die if you lived to be the ideal age that you wanted to be. So for me, I might die in the year 2069 or 2070. I was born in 1979. If I lived to be my ideal age. And it's weird to kind of put it on a calendar like that, right? To like think of a gravestone that would actually, I would die in the year 2070. I'm going to see the 2020s and the 2030s and the 2040s and the 2050s. And what's life going to be like then? What kinds of new suffering will we all experience? Or what kinds of solutions to suffering will we experience? What medical breakthroughs and what great comforts in life will come our way, right? As Christians, we can really think about death that way. We can take death that seriously. Indeed, we have to take death that seriously. We have to take it in a way that seriously because God took it that seriously in the person of Jesus Christ, who died. Jesus died and we will die. There's a Christian tradition, of course, namely that some will not die but will be alive when the Lord returns. And that would be a glorious thing, wouldn't it? We still have to deal with suffering, though. We still have to deal with this problem of evil in the meantime. In whatever this meantime is that we're living in, this weird interim between our birth and between some kind of solution, finally, to our problems. We got to live with it. And the theodicy problem can break out in our lives at any time. It can break out in real life in our own bodies. It can break out in comedy, in comedic ways, things that we read about or watch in drama, and we can see it acted out in film. It can be in stories that we read or from people around us, things that we experience and watch happen in the world. I have a couple of examples in front of me of ways I've seen theodicy just kind of out there in the world, either in jokes or in stories that people have told recently. This one's one of those like meme sequences from a show called Seinfeld. Seinfeld is a show from the 1990s. Kind of grew up watching Seinfeld, love Seinfeld as a comedy George is kind of this character who's a very Eeyore kind of character. Things are always going wrong for him, and he's always very negative and pessimistic. And in this meme kind of cartoon sequence, he's seeing his therapist, and his therapist says, "That's wonderful, George. You'll be rich and successful." George says, "Yeah, that's exactly what I'm worried about. God would never let me be successful. He'd kill me first. He'd never let me be happy." And the therapist says, "I thought you didn't believe in God." And George says, "I do, for the bad things." And I like that as a theodicy joke, because it raises this, this problem of like, when things go badly, we look to God like God is punishing. How often do we think, though, about the pain that's been avoided, and was God then saving us, right? There's always a flip side to theodicy. If God has saved someone, has he also killed another one? If he's killed someone, has he saved another? If he's made one rich, has he made another poor? If God does the bad things, he's got to also do the good things? What do we give God credit for, and what do we not give God credit for? Do we belong to a kind of religion? Any of us, we could slip into this, I'm sure of it, where we just kind of use the word God as a sort of empty signifier for things that are awesome or go well in our lives. Like when I'm making money, or I get the job, or I get, the girlfriend, the boyfriend, whatever it is, and I'm happy, it's like I apply the word God to that feeling. And so God becomes essentially a cipher for power and success. But then what about the bad? Where is God then? So this can cut either way, right? And can really confront us with some very difficult issues in our lives. I also printed off this rant someone went on. This was from the website Reddit. This is a big website where people just post all kinds of things in all kinds of weird categories. This was posted in the subreddit all category, so just anything, rants and raves about anything you want. The subject line is, "God gave my sister cancer." Here's what the person wrote. "I'm in a hotel room as I write this. My 7-year-old sister died of leukemia a week ago. A lot of relatives came to visit my family, and everything was going relatively well. Then one of my uncles said in a not-so-quiet voice that it was my fault that my sister got sick and died because I'm an atheist. I'm usually pretty in control of my emotions, and my uncle's a lot bigger than me, but at that moment I didn't care about any of that. I punched him and didn't stop till 4 people dragged me off him. After that I left and booked myself in a hotel. I've barely stopped shaking. Just had to find a way to vent the remainder of my anger. If God is too much of a coward to confront me directly and chooses to go after my kid sister instead, it's beyond me why anyone would worship him." And there we have it, right? For Christians, yes, but also for atheists, for all kinds of people, we're haunted by this idea of God, and this idea that God might punish us or might reward us based on what we do or even who we are. And if God does that, is it actually fair? And we've raised repeatedly this idea of the act-consequence issue, like the author's uncle there tried to invoke in that tender moment of the funeral. I think it's safe to say that the uncle's solution there did not pass the funeral test that we had raised in an earlier lecture, namely, could a given theodicy solution comfort mourners at a funeral? Indeed, the act-consequence scheme rarely does, the idea that we get what we pay for morally. Yet does it have some truth to it, and can some situations be explained that way? What I've wanted to do throughout this course, and I hope that these lecture videos have borne this out, I wanted to really just show 2 things repeatedly, and I've tried to hit these notes in every lecture in some way, whether I was trying to or not. I think I did, more or less. Number 1, that this problem of theodicy, this problem of evil, this problem of suffering, it really is a problem. It really is a problem in our lives. Every so often I meet students or have students in classes of various kinds, maybe not even classes just around this topic, but introductions to the Bible or Christianity and things like that, who react to this problem of suffering and pain when I bring it up as part of the theological tradition in what I think are very flippant ways. They want to say like, "Oh, no, that's not a problem. Humans have free will, and therefore, we do things." Or, "Yep, God just chooses to kill whom he will kill, and that's just the way it is." It's very flippant. No matter what our solution is to theodicy and the problem of evil, I don't think this is a problem that we can be flippant about. I just don't think we can be flippant or uncaring about this problem. I think we can only be flippant if we're extremely arrogant, on the one hand, if we're extremely naive, or if we've just lived a life where we've been blessed or charmed enough to have avoided certain kinds of suffering. And I don't think anybody who has a serious encounter with suffering is very flippant about suffering or its causes. Suffering tends to drive me, at least, and most of us, to compassion, to complexity. Yes, true, in a moment we may have to resort to a certain kind of simplicity just to kind of get through the day if we're suffering really badly. But ultimately, suffering, I think, drives us to have empathy, sympathy for other people. So one theodicy solution I don't accept and will never accept is this idea that, there is no problem of evil because there is no such thing as evil because humans have free will and it's just like it's your fault, grow up. If that's your view, grow up. There, I said it, okay? I know none of you listening probably have that view, so it's maybe safe for me to say that to the camera, as it were. So I've wanted to convince you repeatedly through stories, through examples, through various kinds of anecdotes, whatever, that this really is a problem. I've also wanted to convince you, though, through many different ways that there actually are solutions, that there are methods and there are ways of thinking about this, and not just ways of thinking about this, ways of singing about this, and ways of praying about this, and even ways of laughing about this that actually make sense within the Christian tradition and make sense as good, solid Christian theology, okay? And I hope that the entire body of the lecture videos are proof of that prior to this one, okay? What have been some of those major theodicy themes or ideas? I can't summarize them all in depth, but let me just rattle a bunch of them off. So we began with the idea of the best of all possible worlds. If God chose this world and created this world and had options to do other worlds, but chose this one must be the best, if indeed God is good. We saw Plato endorsing that early on in the Timaeus dialogue, but also Leibniz, the kind of founder of the modern theodicy idea, by his book Theodicy, endorsed that idea. We live in the best of all possible worlds. It might seem like it sucks, but, in fact, if we knew about other planets out there where suffering is a lot worse, we might feel more grateful for where we're at. So there's that. We also had a lot of free will solutions, and these remain popular. I would even dare say theologically and socially, for Christians, the free will solutions have tended to dominate for a very long time. We choose evil, we choose certain things, and it's hard to avoid the connection between the free will solutions to what I have called repeatedly the act-consequence nexus that the Bible itself seems to endorse so many times, namely the idea that we choose and we do things and we get stuff as the result of that. In other words, the cosmos is like a kind of machine or a kind of rigged thing where you press a certain button and you get a certain kind of result. As the book of Proverbs might put it, you're lazy and you starve. You're diligent and you wake up early and you do, eat your Wheaties and all that stuff. You'll get money and you'll be healthy and you'll thrive. That kind of idea. Free will solutions tend to remind me of that kind of way of thinking about things. And certainly they can become very complex. They're not just about getting what you pay for, but rather that, say, the solution by the theologian John Hick, for example, most famously, I think, in a more contemporary period, put it, free will is a kind of really hard, crazy experiment that God absolutely had to do in order to get the free will reaction of love and choice that's needed for us to react in actual faith, to be actual real adults in a real world, to worship a real God. So free will has to come as a part of that. And so that's a very popular solution that's been offered. We had the Stoic theodicies of various kinds, famously Seneca and Epictetus, but also others like Emerson, the American Stoic philosopher and author as well. Simone Weil seemed to engage in some Stoic kinds of thinking. These were all, by the way, things we reviewed throughout these lecture videos in Mark Larimore's anthology, The Problem of Evil. Namely, the idea that God is not in charge of our luggage. And we may suffer, but we need an antagonist in life. And maybe it's the case that suffering is going to be like a teacher, like a schoolmaster that's going to teach us who we are, and we have to kind of fight it and not cry like little babies because of it, okay? We've looked at models that suggest that attack parts of the theodicy triangle. God is good, God is all-powerful, evil exists. Maybe we could attack the idea that God is good. Did the book of Job or the book of Ecclesiastes question this idea? That God cannot be described as good, but God simply is. But God is real, but God is there, God is a judge. God's not your friend. God's not your happy father waiting to nurture you, but God is some other wild, violent cosmic force who is indeed all-powerful, and evil is indeed real, but don't call him good, don't trap God or define him or call him anything. Or as the book of Ecclesiastes says, don't talk to him too much. God is in heaven and you are on earth. God's going to come to judge you, and that's fundamentally what God is. Or in the book of Job, where God comes to basically tell Job, who are you, you stupid little worm? You know nothing, you have nothing, I'm in control, nature's crazy, nature's violent, my world is violent, you don't like my world? Nothing's wrong with my world, get over it. And then sort of buys Job off at the end with extra stuff and money, and then Job just has to accept. So is God good in those models? Or maybe we attack the notion that God is omniscient, or that God knows the future in a certain traditional way, or that God is all-powerful, let's say, in a certain traditional way. I've raised at various points the idea of process theology, which is not exactly always considered to be an orthodox style of Christian theology, but the idea that God is a kind of growing, living, changing being who kind of grows and learns and adapts with the human experience, something that's different from traditional ideas about God as all-powerful or omniscient and so on. We had a reading from Nell Noddings from a feminist angle, which suggested that maybe theologians should lean into this idea that God is in fact not perfect. In fact, maybe that women and other oppressed groups could look at an imperfect God or a God who changes and so on as a God who has more emotions and therefore has a deeper, better emotional connection with people. We also looked at the ideas of Greg Boyd and others who have posed openness theology or open theology of God, namely the idea that God has some kind of limitation on foreknowledge of the future, therefore God doesn't foreknow our suffering and therefore cause it, but rather God just knows every possible outcome that could happen and is experiencing the world as a contingent being in some sense like us. We pray to God and God can actually respond in prayer or to our prayer from his goodness. So God remains good, but is responding in some way that maybe isn't what people think of as traditionally all-powerful or omniscient. In particular, one idea that we didn't really discuss a lot, we had the reading in here. Where is it? In the reader from John Hick, The Veil of Soul-Making Theodicy. John Hick's views have been some of the most famous theological views that are associated often in contemporary contexts with the theodicy question. John Hick was the one who used this word, the veil of soul-making theodicy. This idea of soul-making refers to the idea that God is trying to create us in some way. He's trying to make our souls into something worthy, of God, and so on. Hick famously posited that there were essentially in Christian thought two strains of theodicy thinking. And this is yet another way, another kind of thing that we can consider back and forth, which is really, really the way. He posited first an Augustinian mode after Augustine, the early church father, whose views we read. Remember, he was the one who said evil wasn't really a thing. It was just a nothing. We can't even talk about it, but rather we choose. And indeed, in this way of thinking, theodicy thinking in the Christian tradition, God has no part in evil. God is not responsible for evil. God does not create evil. There is no evil, actually. Evil's not a thing. Rather, humans create evil out of original sin, Adam and Eve and the fruit of the tree and all that stuff. And so when we talk about evil or suffering, we talk about human sin and human decisions. God has no part in it. The other way of thinking about it is what John Hick called, and not uncontroversially, some people criticized Hick for this view, that there's an IRENAEAN strand after the church father Irenaeus, who also lived around the same time as Augustine, I think a little bit earlier. In the IRENAEAN strand, God is responsible for evil and suffering in a sense. He's responsible for evil in the sense that God oversees what has happened, and things could have been differently maybe, but God was teaching Adam and Eve, and indeed Adam and Eve's action in the garden was part of God's pedagogy, his teaching. And we even had a reading from Irenaeus here called Against Heretics in the reader. And God knew, and I'm looking on page 33 or really 31 of the reader, maybe Irenaeus suggests ideas like, that there's kind of a staggered revelation, that God wanted to reveal his ultimate purpose, culminating in Jesus through time, and uses the imagery of a child that can only have certain kinds of food, maybe milk at one stage, and then harder foods as we grow up. We become accustomed to certain kinds of food. And supposedly in this Irenaean strand then, God is responsible for evil in a sense. He doesn't cause it or make us sin, but he's responsible for it. It's a system that he oversees. It's about learning and a kind of development. Okay, and these are truly different ways of seeing evil and seeing God's involvement in evil, from God having no part in it at all and evil's not even real, to seeing evil as real, but it's a part of God's actual economy, something that God oversees, and something that God will, in both schemes, God will deal with evil, certainly. Okay, the question is just when and how and what are the details. What about the act-consequence nexus? I'll conclude with a couple of thoughts here. I said the professor would render judgment and weigh in, so here I am on just a couple of fronts. What about the act-consequence thing? We've seen that all over the place in the Bible, right? If you've been tracking with these lectures at all, you know that we've been bringing that up repeatedly. What about that? Is that just like a horrible way to think about suffering? I will say this. This is just me, Brian Doak, the Christian, the professor, just a human being. I'm just talking from my own opinion here. The act-consequence thing seems totally legitimate for a lot of scenarios in life. I mean, I can analyze my own life and think about numerous ways and times that I suffer, and it is because of my own actions. And I think to just reject the act-consequence scheme as just totally wrong, totally cruel, totally just wrong, bad, get it out of here, is not a very responsible adult thing to do, in my opinion. I don't think I could be a responsible adult and totally reject the Bible's act-consequence connection, or those theologies that would want to yoke together our actions and our consequences, because our actions actually have consequences. And I can't deny responsibility for who I am and the choices that I really do make. And even if the world is a determinism and I think I'm making choices, but I'm not, I at least think I do. And the best kind of light I have morally and spiritually is that I really am making decisions. How I will treat people around me. Will I commit certain acts and will I not? Will I work hard and do the best I have with what God has given me, or won't I? Okay, Book of Proverbs kind of stuff. I guess the problem is, for me, is when you just run amok and just immediately analyze every situation as an act-consequence moment, which here, I guess, is my actual judgment on which theodicy is best. I know this is, you should have been prepared for this to be a disappointing moment, or maybe this will be a freeing moment for you, or inspiring, I don't know. But which is best? I don't think there's a best one. I think they all have a place. I think Scripture and our theological tradition offers us all of these models because suffering and the problem of evil in theodicy is really hard and cannot just be dealt with by one single solution. Rather, to use a simple metaphor, what we're given in Scripture and through the tradition is a toolkit. We're given a toolkit with lots of different kinds of tools. I mean, let's say you were a mechanic, for example. You'd be totally crazy to say, well, I have a 3/4 inch wrench. I don't really know if that's a thing. Is there a 3/4 inch wrench? I think wrenches come in sizes. Okay, so let's say 3/4 inch wrench. I just used the 3/4 inch wrench on everything. Well, what if you need a screwdriver? Nope, I use the wrench. What if you need to take, what if you need to, cut some wires inside the car? I use the wrench. What if you need to, put oil in the car? I use the wrench. It's like, I mean, that's kind of stupid, right? Like, that's not how tools work. I think seeing Scripture and its theodicies as tools, precisely because they are so different, as hopefully you've seen, and they come in so many different shapes and sizes, even from Jesus's own mouth. It's sin. No, it's for the glory of God. It's for some mysterious purpose. It's for this. I mean, and then you see it all over the place, from the Old Testament to the New, many different models. Because we see that, I think we can only go with a model that seems like a toolkit kind of model. There is no one theodicy to rule them all. And it would be just as silly to take a single theodicy and apply it to everything as it would be to try to use a wrench to fix every problem you'd have trying to fix something. I need to paint these walls. Get out my wrench. It's like, no, that's a paintbrush, and so we use different tools in different times. There's a story I read in the newspaper. I printed it out. I'm so glad, because I actually lost the newspaper, but I printed out the newspaper itself. It was a story it's really moving because it involves the suffering of children. It involves these young girls in Nigeria who were kidnapped by a terrorist group, and this was a thing that had happened somewhat recently. I think there was a bunch of these, a spate of these in 2014, 2015, where terrorist groups in Africa would kidnap girls and then use them as a bargaining chip or for ransom or something like that. And this story, the headline on the story with the pictures of the girls is "Nigeria brought back its girls. Now comes the hard part." I mean, look at their faces. Just look at them. These were girls that were kidnapped by the terrorist group. Nigeria, these women were brought back after being in captivity, and the article's all about how they dealt with trying to integrate back into their lives, into their society. One of the people helping with this said, quote, "There's no playbook for this." Like, how do you deal with this? Psychologists who specialize in kidnapped victims say they are unsure about the best way to simultaneously treat and educate such a large group of women ages 18 to 27 after years of collective captivity and abuse. Yes, abuse. They were physically abused, they were beaten, and many of them were raped or were sexually abused. One thing that they started doing, however, which is actually really charming, really fascinating, is that they got involved in competitive spelling bees. Because, they had to, they have to find a way to, to deal with the girls and educate them once they come back. So here, I'm reading from the article. In late night study sessions, the women collapse in laughter over misspellings. So they're laughing about this kind of stuff, and they're doing all these kind of things. On campus, when they got back, the survivors have struggled to just be students again. One night, how did this all start? The spelling bee thing. One night, plopped on the couches, they watched Aquila and the Bee, a movie about an 11-year-old African-American girl in Los Angeles who finds her confidence after her father's death by winning the Scripps National Spelling Bee. The students watched the movie again and again over bowls of popcorn. They went to their teachers with a demand. They wanted to hold their own spelling bees. The teachers agreed. The young women began memorizing vocabulary lists and testing each other's lexicographic skills. Their wordplay escalated into late-night spelling bees. Quote, "It was unbelievably competitive," Mr. Braggs said. Isn't that amazing to think of them doing spelling bees? The next paragraph, though, just grabbed me in the throat when I read this. On this theme of having tools for thinking about theodicy. Spelling employs a skill many of the women honed while captive, mnemonic memory. Some spent much of their time memorizing lengthy prayers and hymns in captivity. Others composed diary entries in their heads, their thoughts, injustices they suffered. They would later log in journals they kept hidden. In secret, they retold the story of the book of Job, the biblical figure who was punished in a test of his faith. Can you imagine that? These girls in a jungle, captive, abused, recounting to each other the story of the book of Job. Maybe our lives will never take such a dark turn as it took for those girls, and praise God that some of them were rescued and have a chance to recover and see what's left of their lives. But to have a resource like that, in your head, but also in your heart, to have the knowledge of the Christian philosophical tradition of thinking about suffering, to have something like the book of Ecclesiastes, or Proverbs even with its act-consequence scheme, or the book of Job with its huge mysteries, with its titanic mysteries and its strange language, to have that in your heart is to have a resource, to have something tucked away. And you don't know when you're going to use it, and I don't know when I'm going to need what I have. But God has given us these things, and we owe it to ourselves. We owe it to a world of suffering to have these resources and to be able to answer, as the famous verse says, to answer those who question our faith and to answer those who ask us to give a reason for the hope that we have. That hope also includes the hope that God will one day redeem the entire world, and that, as Julian of Norwich said, all will be well and all manner of things shall be well. So I think about those Nigerian girls and what they had in their hearts, the resource they had available to them. And I think about the toolkit. You don't know what you're going to need. We don't know. And so we live, and so we wait. All right, that's the end. I've enjoyed making these videos on this topic so much. Who knows, maybe in the future I'll add extra videos to this series. So if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the playlist, or however that works, you can get updates on this. But for now, this is my final video in the Basics series. It's been my pleasure and an honor to talk with you about these things and to do this. And that's all. All right. Hope I see you soon. Bye-bye.